Here we are, finally, sitting down with the boys from Joov, ready to talk about some damn light magic. You guys up for this?
Definitely.
I'm excited. So, before you came over, for some reason, the past 2 days, I've been a little bit out of it. Just a bit of brain fog. Haven't slept that well in a couple nights. You guys are about to show up at 1. It's 12:40. I'm feeling like I can't put a sentence together. So I go in my office, take my clothes off. I sit in front of the Joov Red Light device that's hanging on my door, which I'll show you, my little situation in there, with clothes on. And I go into my holotropic breathing routine that really fires my brain up. And I'm sitting in front of that red light. And I'm like, see, this is great. I practice what I preach. When I have people on the show, it's usually because I'm doing what they recommend or what they, in some cases, have invented and manufactured. So, huge fan. Just want to get the fanboy part of the show out of the way. Since there's 2 of you, I'd like you to each introduce yourself. Give us a little bit of your background, how you got involved in Joov and doing red light, and then it'll make it easier for people to identify whose voice is whose as we move on through the interview, so I don't have to refer to your name each time I ask you a question. You want to start?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Scott. I'm one of the co-founders of Joov, and I've spent most of my career in traditional MedTech, so with companies like Medtronic, Covidien, Boston Scientific, Bard, primarily in the cardiovascular space, so dealing with products like peripheral stents and balloons and atherectomy catheters. So that's what I was doing in a quote-unquote previous life before Joov, and co-founded Joov with Justin here, who I'm sure he'll introduce himself here in a second, and then our wives, actually. So classic startup story that we can certainly get into as the conversation unfolds, but that's a little bit about me.
Great, thanks.
Excellent.
You got the elevator pitch down nicely. I always get scared when I ask a guest to introduce themselves because I'll say, like, real quickly, just kind of give us your spiel, and then we'll get into the meat of it, and they'll be like, and I'm guilty of this too as a guest. It'll be 45 minutes later, and they're like, and then I went to college. Oh, no. Just want to give them a little context. Okay, next.
I'm Justin Strahan, also co-founder of Joov. I have an engineering background and was introduced to light therapy by my wife, Melissa, high school sweetheart of 20 years married here this past spring.
Wow,
and,
that's awesome.
6 kids along the way, and it's been quite a amazing ride.
Wow, you have 6 kids?
We do.
Damn, do you put your kids in front of the red light?
They do, yep.
They like it?
You bet.
Yeah, that's amazing. And how many kids do you have,
We've got
Scott?
4.
You do?
Yeah.
Wow, you guys are bringing a whole troop out here from the Minneapolis, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Wow, you added to the population significantly here in California. Stop now. Jeez. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, it's funny, Scott, the stuff that you did in the, what do you call it, MedTech?
Yeah,
so
MedTech.
medical technology
Yeah,
stuff. Yeah, everything that you described sounds terrifying to me. The balloons, the stents, all this stuff. This is why I do biohacking, because I don't want to be a customer of your former career, right?
Oh, yeah.
Now with things like light therapy and so many of the other things that I cover on the show, it's preventative medicine, lifestyle applications that I think actually help us avoid disease in most cases, and even in some cases treat diseases, although most people that manufacture said devices cannot claim that they do that. So let's jump right in here, man. I'm trying to think about when I first found out about light therapy. It's probably, I want to say it must have been actually learning about the Joov when I first learned about red light therapy specifically. And so that's strange because I've been into health so long. I wouldn't say in terms of biohacking that I'm an early adopter of the use of light. But what really attracted me to the technology in general, and, to be fair, there are other manufacturers of devices around the world that do various types of red light therapy and LED, lights and infrared lights and near infrared and all that stuff that we're going to cover. So it's not like you guys are the only ones, but you happen to be the one that I found. But I find that strange because there is a lot of science that backs this up, which we're going to get into. But when I discovered it, it was almost as if have I been living under a rock? I feel like I'm the most cutting edge dude when it comes to health. How have I missed out on the light thing? And then I thought about the fact that I actually haven't because, in a sense, I've been using this in nature because I've been into sun gazing for a really long time, maybe going back 15 years. Now, I didn't know that what was happening, partially, one of the benefits was that I was getting that really nice spectrum of light that's inherent to red light therapy at dusk and at dawn, right? So I was getting some of the benefits in a different way without even knowing it. But I've always known that light is powerful. So it's cool stuff I want to dig into. So what is red light therapy in general? How does it work? And you can kind of maybe frame it in relation to the sun. You know, to me, the sun is the ultimate nutrient. I'm a sun worshiper by all accounts. So how have you guys or people in this industry extracted that spectrum of sunlight and amplified it or made it applicable to health practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's you've hit on the main key, which is that light plays an incredible role in our overall health. So I think that's the basis point that many of us, myself included, a few years back, were totally missing. I think all the focus gets put on what we're ingesting, and we totally miss out on the fact that we are designed and have for thousands of years been under the sun, under sunlight, virtually all of the waking moments of our day. And that's something that's radically changed, obviously, over the past 100 to 200 years. And I think that's what's fascinating about light therapy. When I was first introduced to it by my wife, she had tried it out in a salon where many people have maybe first become familiar with the therapy using red light to basically boost collagen production and help with appearance and beauty for beauty purposes, not so much the biohacking health goals. And so that's really where we got started. And then as Scott and I both kind of started to dig into the science, which as you referred to, it's overwhelming. We discovered that, this isn't just some out there concept. It's been well proven for actually decades. And just in the relative near, recent past was really determined that with LEDs can be just as effective as laser therapy that has been, very effective for all kinds of deep tissue, joint pain relief, those sorts of benefits. So that's kind of how we got brought in.
Yeah, and just to add that, you hit it on the head that most people, when they hear about red light therapy, it's sort of compelling in a sense when you flip on a device, it's super bright. You're like, what's going on here? And then, if you take it the next step further, like Justin and I did, it's like, this sounds kind of too woo-woo. I mean, right? I mean, surely this can't lead to muscle recovery and reduced pain and enhanced skin health and, enhanced cognitive function, et cetera, et cetera. But it's one of the therapies that probably one of the most surprising aspects about light therapy or photobiomodulation, as it's often referred to in clinical literature, is that it's supported by a robust amount of published evidence. In fact, with continuous wave, quasi-coherent light therapy, like our devices deliver, there's over 200 double-blind, placebo-controlled studies that have been published on the benefits of red and near-infrared light therapy. And that's an enormous amount of evidence that supports it. So it's kind of one of these unique sort of things that's been around since arguably the mid 20th century, like light therapy in and of itself. The sun, of course, has been around since the dawn of time, at least for us here on Earth. But yeah, it's been around since the mid 20th century. But it's not really hasn't been really well understood. It's kind of this little niche thing, but it's something certainly powerful and can lead to a whole host of benefits.
Well, I did a show in the beginning with one of my favorite guests. She's been on twice, named Nadine Artemis, and she has a company called Living Libations. She makes really great skin products and dental products and things like that. And I think one of the things that she really pioneered was helping the people within health and wellness become knowledgeable about the benefits of sun exposure, and she developed products that are natural that help your skin recover from sun exposure and even some sort of natural sunscreens and things like that. And we did a whole episode about sun. I think if you want to go back, I forget the number, it was in the first 10 episodes or so, you listeners, but it's called The Great Sunshine Swindle. So if you look that up and Google that, you'll find it. But one of the things that was fascinating that she explained during this interview was something called heliotherapy, which goes back hundreds of years. And it's in fact, it used to be a medical treatment to just basically throw people out in the sun. Yep. So someone would have scurvy or polio or whatever the diseases were of the time. And there were these clinics around the world, specifically set up with these rolling beds where they would roll these beds out and throw people in the sun with these reflective sort of plates around them to amplify the sun if it was somewhere in Austria or wherever there was less sun because of its longitude or latitude or whatever. So it's always fascinated me that there's medicine in the light, there's medicine in the sun. And then that sort of disappeared when companies started to make sunscreen. Sun became uncool and dangerous and was demonized. Talk about conspiracy theories, Because if you look back in history, I mean, our ancient peoples worshipped the sun. And I think many of us now look at those people and like, oh, those idiots, those cavemen, those Egyptians, what dumbasses. They thought the sun was important and relevant. They thought that was God. Have you guys ever heard of Jesus? Come on, But I think there's immense power in there. So when I walk outside, I'm getting these different wavelengths of light, a different spectrum of light that's very broad. So you could say there's this a rainbow in terms of the color spectrum or temperature of light. There's a rainbow, and there will be different colors within that rainbow spectrum present in sunlight depending on what time of day. Am I right so far?
Yep, exactly.
So tell me about the different wavelengths of light that are isolated in red light therapy. These what is it, nanometers?
Yep.
Different, your 550, 850, 750. What do the different ones mean? What are they for? And why would we want to concentrate essentially and mimic the sun's spectrums into those narrow spectrums of red?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the thing that people forget about when they start talking about wavelengths, and try to explain it in a way that people's eyes don't glaze over and so forth. But you basically have visible light, right? So between roughly 400 and 700 nanometers, and red obviously falls in that spectrum. So roughly between 600 and 670 nanometers is what we would refer to as the visible red spectrum. And in those wavelengths, what they've determined is they are incredibly effective at having some key biological factors. We can kind of get into more depth here that make it useful for the purposes of red light therapy. And then the broader term, as Scott referred to, photobiomodulation or PBM even for short.
Can you say that slower? Because
Yes.
I always try to say that word to explain it to people, and it's difficult to pronounce.
Photobiomodulation.
Got it.
So
you only say it when you really want to sound impressive.
It's been interesting because even in the past 2 years, that term has actually become more generally accepted in the scientific community. In fact, just recently, Dr. Michael Hamblin was promoted to the chief editor of photobiomodulation, and I'm trying to remember the rest of the term, but they basically added photobiomodulation to the name of a journal,
yeah.
Whereas it used to be photomedicine. So, but anyways, I digress. So with the wavelengths, red is important, and then also near infrared. So as you've seen on your Joov, and if you heard in the world of light therapy, near infrared light at specific wavelengths is quite important as well. From a cellular function standpoint, it basically has the exact same effect as red, the red light wavelengths, but it just is better at penetrating to deeper tissue. So the near infrared, looking in between 800 and 880 or so nanometers, are the ones that have the most scientific evidence. So if you were to look on PubMed under photobiomodulation or low-level laser therapy, you could find a whole host of other wavelengths that have some interesting things as well. But the bulk of the science has been shown in those two ranges.
And maybe an easier way to describe it is most people understand that if I eat a carbohydrate or a protein or a fat, my body responds in a certain way. It's not too dissimilar to light therapy in the sense that our bodies will metabolize different wavelengths of light differently, especially at different times of the day, based on our circadian, built-in circadian clock. And so these specific wavelengths, red wavelengths, and then near infrared. So not far infrared, because that oftentimes gets confused, but near infrared. Those two wavelengths have been studied the most within the world of photobiomodulation. And like Justin said, they have the same type of mechanism of action at a cellular level. But that's pretty key to start out with, is making sure that like those specific wavelengths, if you're using a device, or if you're just outside more, what's one of the benefits of seeing, back to your point about sun gazing, seeing sunlight in the morning and the evening, there's a higher concentration of red and near infrared wavelengths during the sunrise and sunset. And so it's pretty important whether you're doing it naturally, which is the best way, or trying to sort of supplement your lifestyle with a light therapy device.
Well, for me, in a perfect world, right, if we were, say we transport ourselves back, pre-industrial revolution. So let's just say we go back to 1700, okay? I mean, we're still kind of screwed because it's post-agriculture, so we've already gone downhill because we're not hunter-gatherer. Let's go back 15,000 years, actually, okay? So we're Paleolithic, hunter-gatherer, robust, healthy people. In that environment, no non-native EMFs, no junk blue lighting, no preservatives in the food, no GMOs, no Roundup in our food, all of the stuff that we face now, no air travel, all the things that wreck us at this point. It wouldn't really make sense going back that we would need all of these interventions, in other words, to amplify and isolate that spectrum of light that's inherent to the sun, because we'd be outside, we'd be grounded, we'd be getting exposed to cold, to heat, we would be getting challenged in every way, and we would just be a more robust creature, as most animals are in nature, right? But now it makes perfect sense to me to do something relatively unnatural, which is to harness those wavelengths of light that, sure, maybe we get a little of that near infrared, and we get that red spectrum at dawn and at dusk. And sure, you can go out and get some of that. You don't need to buy a device to do that. However, we're now being inundated with so many things that are antithetical to our health and well-being. So to me, like, people always hassle me because I do all these preemptive interventions and enhancements that aren't technically natural. I'm doing air quotes. Like, yeah, plugging in a red light thing to the wall and standing naked in front of it for 10 minutes twice a day is not natural. But to me, that's just a counterbalance to everything else that we're being hammered with. And so 15,000 years ago, probably didn't need that because everything's working in accordance with nature, but we're so disconnected that you have to kind of go the extra step now and beat nature in a sense. So I don't know what the question is there. It's more of a statement in support of this. So what are your views on, how we're integrating something that's technically not natural, but we're isolating an element of nature, we're amplifying that, and we're taking control of our ability to use that,
right,
and also in shorter durations.
Yep, exactly. Well, no, you hit on a good point, because most people don't think about, like, over the course of their day and at scale over the course of a lifetime, how little natural sun we really get. I mean, there's kind of a common data point that's referenced on this topic that roughly 90, in the low 90 percentile is the amount of time that we spend indoors away from natural
terrifying.
sun. But it sounds super high, but when you think about it, look out. I mean, this is in corporate America, where I sort of came from. We were in the Midwest, in Minneapolis. I get up, right, in the morning, get ready inside under artificial light, right? I commute to work in a car inside, no natural sunlight. I spend,
let's add, you're behind the glass of your car, so you're eliminating 50% of the UV, the ultraviolet light. So even in your car, it's bright, but you're not getting actual, real, natural light.
Right, exactly. And then you spend, 8 or 9 hours inside under, again, artificial light. Then the sun sets, especially, most of the time, 5,
This
6,
sounds like
7.
a dreary life. Congratulations on moving to LA and bringing Joov with you. Yeah,
but that's the reality for most people. And then when you stop and think about it, you're like, wait a second. Yeah, I probably spent 90% of my day inside, away from the sunlight. And so, like, we're in this space, on a daily basis, kind of in the light game. And it's like, I find myself, I still have to be intentional about getting outside more, and working outside, because it's a habit for most of us, especially those that are probably listening to the show, like getting outside more often and getting natural sunlight. And so light therapy is just one of those supplements or hacks, if you want to call it that, to sort of feed your body, how it was supposed to be fed, in our based on our sort of how our body's biological systems have evolved over time.
Yeah, because if light is a nutrient, which we know that it is, then it essentially you could be said as you're taking a supplement, just like you'd take a vitamin D supplement because you're not getting enough sun, or vitamin K2 or something that's difficult to get in our modern diet. So this is a way of supplementing the master nutrient, which is light. You got any views on that, just from a evolutionary standpoint on how we might have taken in light before and the benefits of taking that to the next level now?
No, I mean, you hit on a lot of the great points there. I mean, as you pointed out, our life is drastically different. I mean, even taking the light thing aside, the radio waves, Wi-Fi signals, Bluetooth, just the electrical magnetic fields that we're constantly surrounded with, for the 99.99% of us that leave our power on at night or Wi-Fi on at night. We're constantly being bombarded by those things. So all those things have a negative effect on the cellular function and the mitochondrial function that basically every single function of our body boils down to. And so with light therapy, what we're able to do is give basically a jump start or a boost to those functions and help restore that healthy cellular function to really bring meaningful health changes for a significant number of people. So I think one of the funnest things about being in this industry is just seeing the wide range of responses that people have to the therapy, because it's impossible to predict what people are going to experience. I mean, we've hit on a lot of the different things, but you'll have somebody that buys it because they want to reduce muscle soreness or pain after a workout, and then a month later or 2 months later they realize their skin looks 5 years younger, and they have people calling them out for it. So it's kind of cool just to see the response and the really life-changing differences that the therapy can have.
I think the other thing about the sun part of the equation is that the time factor. It's not just that we're spending so much time indoors, but it's to get the exposure of that much of the red spectrum of light from the sun would take a hella long time, right?
No doubt.
You go stand in front of a red light device and you're 3 inches away from it too, right? And so the amount of it you're getting in as a nutrient, it's mega dosing that light in a 10-minute period of time versus having to catch a whole sunset period that might be an hour and a half of that spectrum or something at the beginning or the end of the day.
Yep.
So I like that too from the perspective of just time economics. Tell us about how this nutrient gets into our body, because I think a lot of people are unaware that you are a giant solar panel when you don't have clothes on. Whoever wants to speak on that part of it, how you actually get the nutrient into your body.
Yes, I'll touch on that briefly. So at a high level, there's some different things going on from a mechanism of action standpoint, but it sort of all starts at the cellular level. And so red and near-infrared light, as Justin pointed out earlier, it's the same type of mechanism of action. Our cells respond to it in the same way, these specific wavelengths. But depth of penetration is probably the biggest differentiator there between the two. So red light has a greater propensity to be absorbed by the dermis and epidermis of our skin, whereas near-infrared light has a unique ability to penetrate our tissues deeper. And so that's kind of the difference between those two ranges of wavelengths.
Does the sun produce, sorry for interrupting, does the sun produce the near-infrared, the invisible?
It does.
Is that what makes you hot when you're out in the sun?
Yeah, exactly.
Is it?
Well, it's more the mid and the far infrared wavelengths that generate the most of the heat.
Ah,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
All right, carry on.
Yeah, and Justin has a nice example to sort of explain that, if we want to touch on that. But in terms of the mechanism of action, there's sort of some immediate things that go on, and there's some secondary things that happen at a cellular level. But for most researchers in this space, in the photomedicine space, it's become pretty clear that, generally speaking, these wavelengths of light enhance mitochondrial function. So they help your cells produce more energy. And if we go down the rabbit hole a little bit further, there's a specific enzyme during the fourth phase of cellular respiration, cytochrome C oxidase, or CCO. And that enzyme has it absorbs these specific wavelengths to a great degree. And by doing that, by activating that enzyme, you're actually energizing electrons, in essence. And so you create this gradient. You help your cells create this gradient in the mitochondria that then helps produce more ADP, which is a precursor to ATP, which is cellular energy. So if I just, to put it plainly, these very specific wavelengths of light actually help the mitochondria in your cells function better. They produce more energy.
Wow, yeah. Trippy. And that happens because your sun has photoreceptors in it that's able to see. I picture our skin, and I didn't used to know this, but I picture our skin when I said we're a walking solar panel. I mean, it really kind of is like that. So all over our body, on every single part of our body, our skin has the ability then to take in that information or that nutrition, and then the mitochondria then use that energy in a sense and are able to produce ATP.
Yeah, it's like a signal. It's like a signal to your mitochondria, and the reason you get such a wide variety of benefits,
It's
right?
trippy.
Like everything from skin health to muscle recovery to joint pain relief, all this stuff that almost reads like a too good to be true, laundry list of benefits. It's because like mitochondria are present in nearly every single cell in our body, and so of course, you get a wide variety of benefits because of that. Because it's the same mechanism of action throughout your entire body. The only limitation would be, depth of penetration, right? If you're just using red light, for example. But that's why those benefits are so wide ranging is because of that core mechanism of action.
So, the red light in and of itself hits the surface of the skin, but the near infrared has the ability to penetrate beneath the skin, so into the muscle tissue, ligaments. Does it go as far to hit your bone?
Yep. Yeah, definitely. It's been shown.
I mean, depending on where in your body and how much, how many inches of muscle are in the way, I'm assuming?
Exactly. Yeah, there's just some different factors for sure. But yeah, there's published clinical evidence that suggests these wavelengths of light, near infrared in particular, does enhance bone growth, right? And nerve regeneration even. Yeah, so it's pretty interesting when you start really peeling back the layers
so
of the onion.
we got to tie this into the OsteoStrong bone density training. That's meaningful. Wow, that's interesting because we were touching on that a little bit before we recorded. It's a recent discovery of mine, and it's just incredibly fast and efficient way to build bone density. And I mean, these guys are getting people out of wheelchairs that have osteoporosis very quickly. It's insane.
That's pretty cool.
But imagine adding the red light therapy to that. That's basically there's machines that stress your bones and bend your bones and put pressure on them rather than your muscles, to increase, the growth factors of your actual physical bone.
Right.
So that's interesting. No, my brain's ticking now. Stay focused, Luke. Stay focused. I'm like, let's make a phone call. I'm always thinking of ways to sort of, because I meet so many fascinating and knowledgeable people like you guys, and many people that have developed technology or a modality of healing, and I always just think, okay, who can these guys connect with and maximize the benefits of everyone's protocol?
Sure.
It's fun and interesting to be able to do that. So give us the numbers of the different wavelengths that are inherent to sun, near infrared, far infrared, all of that. I want to know more of the numbers, because you'll notice with different lasers, like I have where'd it go? It's across the room here. I have some lasers from Power Medic lasers, cold lasers that you can treat injuries with, or tennis elbow, things like that. I use them to heal my dog's spade surgery. I did for a week. I lasered her little wound every day and healed it 4 times as fast. I mean, it's incredible. But one of those is 808 nanometers, and it's 1500 millivolts, I think. Again, I'd have to get up to get the device, but I'm always like, why did they pick 808? Why is, my blue blocking glasses from Raw Optics are 550 nanometers. They're very specific, the ones that people pick for different things.
Yeah, I mean, some of it goes back to the cytochrome C oxidase and which wavelengths have been shown to activate that process. So as I mentioned earlier, you could find studies conducted on just pretty much any visible light wavelength that probably has some some inherent benefits. But when it boils down to the cellular function, is typically in that 600 to 670 nanometers, and again in the 800 to 880. And in talking to Dr. Michael Hamblin, even in his expertise, where he's published over 400 clinical studies, asking him, he would basically say, well, 800, 810, 850, 880, those are all, very, very effective, So it's, there's still much to be understood, quite honestly, about some of the nuances between those when you're talking just 10, 15, 20 nanometers apart in that range.
Right.
So I think it'll be really cool to see, over the next few years, some of the things that come out. But back to your earlier question on wavelengths in general, sunlight has a wide range. So you have UV below 400 nanometers, visible light, obviously, near infrared, which is roughly 700 to 1300 nanometers, mid, generally thought of between 1300 to 3000 nanometers, and then far infrared, well beyond that spectrum. But as we've discussed, those wavelengths all have a different biological response. So when you get into the mid and far infrared wavelengths especially, those wavelengths are absorbed much more quickly by moisture in our tissues, or really any type of moisture. So the reference that Scott was referring to earlier is the fact of if you find yourself out on a hot sunny day out here in sunny Southern California, you feel that radiant heat from the sun. But if a cloud passes by, even though the visible light stays essentially the same, the heat feels like somebody just flipped a switch off. And that's because the moisture in that cloud is absorbing those mid and far infrared wavelengths and basically catching all that energy so that it's not hitting your skin and being absorbed, in that top couple layers of the dermis that you feel
that's
as
interesting. Heat. So the cloud's acting as a filter.
Exactly.
Essentially. Wow, trippy.
In fact, there's some studies actually that when using more full spectrum devices, they'll actually use water filtration to filter out some of those mid and far infrared wavelengths.
Oh, for real?
Yeah, on purpose. Yeah, just to try to like harness in specific wavelengths of light. Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
That's interesting, man. And then what about the difference between lasers? I mentioned that I have this laser here and I use it for different things, and it's amazing. More of a medical device, very expensive, not for everyone, but it's one of those things like now that I have one, I couldn't live without it because I use it if I cut myself or if I have a mosquito bite. I'll put the cold laser. It's a very tiny diode, It's like one of your diodes in a little wand, essentially. It looks very much like a vibrator, which is awkward when people come over and see it on the coffee table. But I'll put that on a mosquito bite, and mosquito bite's gone next day. I mean, it's just incredible. I'm like, this is amazing, But again, it's a case-by-case use. It's not something that I would use every day. I don't need it. It's just, as needed. What's the difference between red light therapy and a laser that appears to be red?
It's essentially the exact same thing, and that's what really is the history of photobiomodulation or light therapy. It goes back to using lasers, sometimes called cold lasers, as you referred to, or low-level laser therapy, LLLT. And many of the studies that you would go back, several decades that showed the beneficial effects at the cellular level using lasers. At a functional standpoint, the only difference between a laser and an LED is a laser is what they refer to as a coherent light source. So now instead of an LED has a fairly narrow band of wavelengths. So let's say that LED is a 670 nanometer LED or 660 nanometer LED. It's going to produce light in a range fairly close to that, say plus or minus 5, 10, 15 nanometers. Whereas a laser, it's coherent, so it's going to be using the exact same wavelength. And not only that, but the waves are lined up. So you have them being, and that's why they basically stays together in this tight beam that you can, shine for, up something up close, or, powerful lasers that can obviously go for, miles. So that's the functional difference. But what the research has shown, originally some of the research that was funded by NASA, and they basically demonstrated that LEDs can be just as effective as lasers for this entire cellular process that has been, studied for decades.
Wow. Interesting stuff.
Yeah, I mean, if you go to like a photomedicine conference, right, and you have a bunch of academics that are all doing research, most of those like old school like researchers, they would argue that laser is still the gold standard, right? But a guy like Dr. Hamlin, who's on our scientific advisory board, has published over 400 peer-reviewed clinical articles. He actually just published a piece just recently that basically, it's hard to read a piece like that and not come to the conclusion that LEDs are not only just as effective as lasers, but they come with like distinct advantages in that you can actually treat much larger surface areas with LEDs than you can with a laser. So there's a lot of those advantages to using LED-based therapy. And in fact, now when you see recent clinical literature that where researchers have used LED therapy, they'll actually use a different acronym. So instead of calling it LLT, they'll say, you know, LEDT, right? So LED based therapy instead. And so
to differentiate.
yeah,
so
and that's just because as
yeah.
technology advances, LED technology advances, you can do very similar things that you previously couldn't. So you can deliver even more specific ranges of wavelengths of light. You can deliver even more power density to a certain tissue, stuff that you just couldn't do previously. And so you know, but you know, kind of as Justin mentioned, our bodies don't care where sort of the light came from, so to speak. It just cares that it's a specific wavelength and it does a specific thing at a cellular level.
Right.
So, yeah.
And in terms of the power output, so you guys, the wavelength of light is what, 670? Or you guys have a couple different frequencies?
Yep, we use red at 660 and near infrared at 850.
Oh, okay. So it's a bit of a range. And then what about the output of power? When I interviewed Arnie Grinstead from Power Medic Lasers, he was explaining, I said, well, why does one laser cut a pair of denim jeans in a factory and one laser, you know, you can do surgery with it, it'll just cut a hole in your skin like a scalpel, and yours just heals my tennis elbow? And he said, well, it has to do with the power output. You know, you can, as you said, you can magnify the power of a laser, and that laser can go for miles, or you put it up close and you could cut someone's body in half or something. So what kind of power amplification are we looking at with a device like you guys make?
Sure. Well, I mean, breaking it down like your with the laser that you mentioned you have, I suspect it was a 1.5 watt or a 1500 milliwatt
1500 milliwatt, yeah,
laser. And so you'll see that's a pretty typical for like a consumer laser. In a medical setting, you may see them up to 3 or even 4,000 milliwatts. But obviously there's dangers there when you get too powerful. As you mentioned, you don't want to be like cutting, overheating tissue. So that's a real danger with LEDs because of the focused energy aspect of that coherent light source. Whereas with LEDs, you're basically using a lens to broadcast that light over a specific area. And that's where you can distribute that. So from a scientific nature, you're probably looking at studies in the photobiomodulation anywhere from 20 milliwatts per square centimeter on up to 100 milliwatts per square centimeter. Generally, that 100 milliwatt range is considered the upper limit of what is beneficial for human tissue to be able to absorb and harness without being overheated.
Cool. There's one thing that I like about you guys, and that you I think maybe I talked to you or I emailed Scott and he asked you or something, but it was about the EMF exposure. There's two things that annoy the hell out of me when it comes to biohacking technologies. Is A, someone will make a technology that's really good for you and has a very legitimate application, but it emits tons of blue light. This drives me crazy. I'll get some device, I turn on, I'm like, awesome. You guys, you're charging $10,000 for this device, and you turn it on, it like ruins your sleep, which defeats the whole purpose of being healthy. It's excruciating.
And you have to use it at night.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, a lot of the devices, you use them, you use them passively, and it is often when you get home from work at night. I'm like, you idiots. Like, why does everyone have to put blue lights and everything? It drives me insane. And so I'm the jerk that emails people and is like, hey, have you ever considered like doing a device without blue light? And they're like, you're the only nerd that would ever email us concerned about it. So no, sir, we are not. But the other thing is EMFs. Yep. And there's a lot of great devices out there that are good for your health, but the manufacturers have either ignored out of ignorance, or else perhaps the cost, or it's just not worth their the marketing punch that they would get out of, the time and money having to put into the development end of it. But a lot of these devices produce a lot of EMF. So again, with the blue light, while a device might be healthy for you and has a lot of benefits, it's also detrimental to your health because you're getting blasted with, in some cases, a magnetic field because it has some kind of motor in it, or even just a really powerful electric field like the device that we're using to record on right now. I tested these headphones. By the way, you guys are getting blasted with EMFs right now. Heads up. But you know what I discovered, actually, I'll just digress here, is if this thing's running on batteries, it's very low EMF, but I don't trust the batteries, so I plug it into the wall, and we're getting EMFs from the wall into the headphones. Sucks, but it's the way it is. But anyway, back to the point. So a lot of people make these great devices, and they're good for you, but they're bad for you because they have EMF. So how did you guys even become aware, as you started to design a device for health, that EMF was an issue, and how did you stop it from being really strong?
Yeah, no, that's something that we were really forced to consider early on, around the same time that we really were discovering light therapy and the just the incredible benefits of it. My wife and I, our oldest son, was really struggling with some different health challenges, and through kind of a process of elimination and learning about different things and reading, which my wife deserves 100% of the credit for doing all that, because at the time I was in the corporate America and didn't have time to chase that stuff down. But she had really had a passion for taking care of our health issues for all of us in the family, and she really discovered kind of the science behind the EMFs and the dangers behind it, and come to find out that one of the core things that was really keeping our oldest son from being healthy was being surrounded by EMFs all the time. And he had just an incredible change by simply unplugging computers and things around his bed where he slept at night. It was like a night and day difference. So we were fortunate to become aware, because like you said, a lot of people, it's not that they don't care or wouldn't care, they just aren't aware of the dangers of it. And for a whole host of reasons we won't get into, that's just not something that's very well understood or educated, kind of in the mainstream media. So it was something that we were aware of, and that we wanted to make sure that we did everything we could to mitigate that. So a couple of the things that make a difference, a lot of it has to do just with the internal wiring of the components, so things like the drivers, even the power cords. And on the original Joov, the EMFs were quite low. I can't remember if you specifically had done testing on it, but we had numerous people that did, that would do tests and report their findings. But whether it was ourselves or somebody else doing testing on it, that was something that many people are now in tune to and aware of. So we're looking at outputs at the recommended treatment distance of less than 1 milligauss, and then looking at the ELF, or electromagnetic fields, of less than 10 volts per meter. So both of those are about what you're probably experiencing walking through the middle of a room, at least of a house that has electrical power. So it's just virtually nothing, no detectable difference from what you're basically exposed to, anywhere where there's electrical power. So that being said, we've even taken further steps with the new Joov modular system because of just the benefits of trying to avoid EMFs as much as possible. So we've done some pretty extreme steps in terms of the shielding on the power cords. We're now using like multiple layers of methods, whether it's a wire mesh as well as like a foil wrap, to basically encase the electromagnetic field, so that that's not something that you're exposing your body to, and as well as the internal components, just really taking things up to a next level where we're having things custom manufactured that hasn't been done in this way.
Wow.
To shield things with
That's cool.
aluminum encased drivers, things like that. So it's been something that we've been in tune to for some time. So it's been actually really cool to see that people are in fact becoming more educated about that, and something that they should evaluate when they're choosing a device.
Well, it's sort of, one of the things about marketing a device that's largely, in the beginning, the early adopters are going to be the biohackers that have an awareness about issues like this. So it kind of sucks in a sense. When you design something, you're like, oh, we're going to, nerds are going to test it with their EMF meters and, talk crap about you online if you don't do it right. And it's good, but I imagine as a manufacturer, you're like, God, we don't, you have to do it overkill, especially because it's for a crowd like me. But I appreciate that, I really do, because I know that it's more expensive in terms of development to have to even pioneer in some cases to do some R&D to actually figure out how to mitigate those issues. But I just want to applaud you for that and say, like, man, it's for anyone out there that's an entrepreneur that's wanting to develop technologies in the health space, just trust me, it's going to pay off later, because you can use that then in your marketing as people become more discerning, as awareness builds around other issues like EMF. You can say, like, hey, we're the first to market that is low EMF, which is one of the huge selling points of clear light saunas. I mean, that's kind of their claim to fame, is I think they're the lowest EMF in the business of infrared saunas, if not, one of the lowest, at least for a company that's large scale like them. And that's why I first found out about that type of sauna, because I had a cheap Korean one from Costco or something, and I was like, oh, EMFs are an issue. That's right. Shit, I'm sitting in a giant electric box, and sure enough, they were exorbitantly high. And so I started researching and then found Clearlight, and that's why now I work with them and help promote them and stuff, because I think they're the best. So hats off to you. If anyone's listening that manufactures, let me look around here, Biomats, hello, Biomats. Great devices, real high in the EMF there, guys. Come on. I don't think people in Japan listen to my show much, but anyway.
But it's interesting, just to add to that real quick, Luke, like even with our new devices, like there's some other cool features, right? Like they're Bluetooth compatible. They function with our app remotely. You can track, your historical Joov usage. All cool things.
Oh,
but like
what?
people that are listening to this,
I'm glad you mentioned the new device, because I'm just like, cool, it's bigger, it's module, it's different than the one I have, but I didn't even realize there were new features.
Well, no, I mean, we don't have to go do a feature dump here, but I guess our point was that at the same time, you could completely hardwire them too. So it's totally optional. So if you're not, if you don't like Bluetooth, you're not a fan, you can hardwire.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So if I had it turned on and the Bluetooth was enabled and it wasn't hardwired, I'd be getting some of the Bluetooth signal. But if I'm someone that's EMF sensitive, I could just kill that whole option and not even deal with
hardwire.
it. That's cool.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
that's one thing I like. Like I have my Aura ring here, and I'm having Harpreet from Aura on the show. When I met him face to face first time, I was like, how many times is the Bluetooth on this pinging my body? And he's like, no, we know about that. It reports twice a day or something, or when you sync it. Or I was like, okay, good, because it is an issue, but it's cool. A lot of people are becoming more aware of that.
It's funny when we were marketing like the new devices, that feature, we got like people. There's a little bit of a backlash. Whoa, you guys, what are you guys doing? You enabled. It's like no, it's optional. It's optional.
right. Yeah.
Change the word on the website. Optional. We gotta make this clear. It's like a cool feature to most people, but some people they don't want.
The Clearlight saunas have that too. You can play your music through the speakers, and I never have it turned on. I'm always in there frying my phone. Probably why my phone doesn't work actually. Now that I think about it. So yeah, it's cool. Some people like those, and to be honest, I've noticed some people are more sensitive to EMFs than others. I'm pretty sensitive to EMFs. I get tweaked when I'm in an environment that has a lot of that stuff going on, So I'd probably be one that would lose the functionality of something like Bluetooth. Like the Muse headband, the meditating thing, amazing piece of technology. I love it, but I don't love having Bluetooth on my head. So it's not, for me, I'm just too sensitive to it. But for someone that's trying to learn how to meditate, oh my God, amazing technology. I don't know if there's any way for them to do it without Bluetooth, because it's sensing your brain waves and training you to meditate as you go, and it wouldn't really work plugged in. Anyway, another conversation, but eventually everyone will catch up, and at least like you guys have done, have options where somebody can just totally safeguard or use some of the advanced features that do have a little bit of a deleterious effect. Okay, well, I appreciate that you don't want to be too commercially and do a feature dump, but I'm curious as a user who has the OG, the Max version, I think, which I like just fine. When I heard you guys had new ones, I was like, that's cool. Mine seems to work great. I don't, maybe it'd be cool to have a whole wall of them, like a Motley Crue concert of Marshall stacks. It's just more impressive when it's bigger and taller. But what are some of the things that you guys added in, since I haven't talked to you in a while?
Yeah, so probably the biggest change, and Justin sort of dropped that earlier, is it's modular now. So if you don't have sort of the budget to go all in with the Max device like you have, you can start with like one device now and then add to it over time. And so you can sort of build out your full body system really over the it's completely customizable over the course of a a lifetime.
So you might, for when you guys listening, I'm looking at these panels, but they look to be about 3.5 feet long or so.
Yeah, about 3 feet by 9 inches.
Oh, okay, 3 by 9. So that's one panel. So you could effectively hang that on your closet door or whatever, and treat your upper body and face or whatever, and then over time make it a little wider or make it longer so that it's complete head to toe, instead of having to throw down all that coin up front for the one that I have that's maybe looks like about 4 of those almost close to it, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so that's probably the biggest change. I mean, there's other features that we incorporated as well. So like they have all of our devices now have built-in one-touch controls that allow you to not only control the time, right, of the device, but also you can switch between red, near infrared, or both in the same device. So if you just want to use all red wavelengths, or if you just want to use all near infrared, you can you have that option now.
Oh, interesting.
With each
and
device.
why would one? I want to get into some of the benefits. The hair loss, the hormones, the muscle recovery, scars, wrinkles, all that kind of stuff. But just offhand right now, why would someone one day go, oh, today I just want to do near infrared?
Yeah, it's a great question. So most of the time, people are probably going to use both, just because there's that's where, like with our legacy devices, almost across the board, people opted for our sort of our combo or our dual configuration of both red and near infrared light, just because there's a lot of benefits to both wavelengths. But one example would be like my wife. She deals with some melasma issues, some pigmentation issues when using near infrared on her face. So she actually uses just red light on her face, and then the dual configuration on the rest of her body. And so that would be a practical example of someone that maybe doesn't want to use near infrared on their face because of pigmentation issues. So you just the cool thing is you have that option now.
Right.
Most people probably won't use the option, but
right.
It's there. It's there if you want to do it, which is pretty cool. We mentioned the Bluetooth functionality. If you're a fan of that, you can now control the device remotely from your phone. Syncs with your the new Joov app on your phone. And by the time this goes live, apps on the Google Play and iOS or the Apple Store will be live. But you can track your historical usage too, so you can see if you thought you were Jooving every day, and you look back, you're like, wait, I've only been doing it like twice a week.
Right.
I need to up my game a little bit. So you can track your historical usage.
That's
which
cool.
Is
I like
cool.
I like the a lot of the wearables, of course, have an app attached to them, and a lot of the technology. I like the tracking because it helps me with compliance just as a user. It's like with the Oura Ring. My sleep is dramatically improved, not because the ring makes you sleep better, but because I'm trying to beat my record. It's like I get up, the first thing I do is I check my Joov, and I'm like, oh, God damn it. I got a 76. All right, tonight I'm going to crush that and go to bed earlier and supplement right and do whatever right so that I can beat that. So it's a way to gamify some of these practices. So I like that I can see, oh man, I'm killing it. I've Jooved twice a day for the past 7 days. It's amazing. It makes it easier to discipline and habituate some of those things.
Right, no doubt.
Yeah, and then what's the deal with the so also you have a timer in it now too.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll just shut off after your session or whatever.
Yep. You can just control. You can if you want to Joov for 10 minutes,
Yeah.
just go use 10 minutes on the built-in.
I
control.
usually do about 5 minutes the front of the body and 5 minutes the back. Is 10 minutes a day a good dose, or did I just make that up?
No, that's solid with the type of power output that you're that's delivered. That's a solid dose for.
Okay, it is. Okay, cool.
Especially since you're doing it twice a day. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely do it once a day because it's just built into my morning routine. The second one, and that leads me into my next question is about, timing that would be most in accordance with, I guess, the spectrums of light. And I have a feeling what the answer is. But it is the second one, if I don't get it right around dusk, then I don't like to do it. Because if I do it at like 10 o'clock, I might get sort of hyped.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it energizes me a bit. And not that I wouldn't say it interferes with sleep, but I don't like to do anything that's stimulating at all late at night. And that is my next question. So I think I might have emailed you, Scott, at one point, and I was like, when am I supposed to use this thing? And I believe that you indicated ideally around sunrise and sunset in a perfect world.
Right. Exactly.
Why is that?
Yeah. I mean, we sort of touched on this a little bit earlier in that our biological systems have evolved to sort of maximize or take advantage of those wavelengths in the natural sunrise and sunset. And there's a higher prevalence of red and near infrared wavelengths during the sunrise and sunset. And so ideally, those are probably the optimal times. But my short answer to that question is when should I, Joov? Just do it any time during the day. Just try to get it in. But if you really want to biohack and optimize, those are probably the best times. Either in the morning or in the evening, or maybe both.
Right.
Yeah.
I was halfway joking, asking Justin about his kids doing. I mean, do kids like the red light? I mean, do they gravitate toward it, or is it something you're like, okay, time to brush your teeth and do your red light? I mean, are they into it or not?
Some of them are definitely. So our youngest daughter is 5 now, and it's to the point now where, like, if she gets an owie or something, like, I need to do red light.
Yeah. Oh, nice, nice.
So she knows that it's gonna help it. So no, I'd say in general they like it. I mean, even our teenagers use it regularly. So
that's cool.
My oldest son, I mentioned earlier, that has sensitivity to EMFs. He's he uses it faithfully and really enjoys it. So. I think it kind of maybe depends on their interest in their overall health to some extent. Sure. But I would say that most people, kids included, feel something, some sort of a benefit from it, and brings them back.
What's interesting, even like Rob Wolf and his wife, they noticed the benefits most with their kids initially. Right? Their kids actually were using it, and they're like, wow, I mean, they kind of, the issues like getting to sleep at night, and they're like, that was the biggest change they noticed, is their kids were like falling asleep faster, at night. So, there's definitely. Yeah.
Well, I've noticed that, and I don't know if it's just because she likes to hang out wherever I am, but if I sneak out of one of these rooms here that we're in and go into my office man cave and throw on the red light, Cookie will come and sit right next to me when I'm doing the red light. She just stares right up at it. So she likes that field. What the dog really likes is the freaking sauna. I can't get in the sauna. She'll come beg to come in the sauna, in the clear light sauna. It's crazy. Yeah, at first I was a little nervous. I'm like, am I going to kill my dog? I know that hot cars will kill your dog, but I let her in, incrementally. And she's up to about 10 minutes on the floor where there's some airflow still under the door there. But she freaking loves it. So I think animals,
that's funny.
I think animals intuitively like those warm, cozy wavelengths of light and heat, it seems, too. And that brings me to the next thing, which is a question I get all the time in my Facebook group. By the way, those of you listening to this podcast, we have an amazing private Facebook group called the Lifestylist Podcast. You can request to join, and we'll let you in there, and you can join the conversation, and you can ask questions like this, and our other members will answer, or I will do my best to answer. One I get a lot in that group specifically is, Luke, I'm thinking about getting the Joov or the clear light sauna. Which should I get? And I'm always like, it's such an annoying question because they're totally different things. They have different goals, different mechanisms of action. So how would you, not which one should I buy? Obviously, you're getting paid if someone buys a Joov. But what's the difference between someone taking an infrared sauna, like my clear light is full spectrum, so it has near, far, and mid. But what are the benefits or the different mechanisms of action between doing red light therapy and sauna therapy?
Yeah, no, that's a common question. In fact, we have an article on our website that kind of goes into a little bit of the science behind it.
I've sent people there, I think. Yeah, because I'm like, not again. Just look at them. They look different. It's not the same thing. Which one should you buy? I don't know. No.
Yeah, no, it really comes down to, I guess, what your specific health goals are. But from breaking it down from a scientific standpoint, saunas is obviously a heat-based therapy. So you're using specific wavelengths of light to heat tissue, and you're inducing heat shock proteins. Your cardiovascular system is involved. Basically produces a response very similar to cardiovascular exercise. Most of the clinical research is really centered around that. So around the differences, the benefits around your cardiovascular system. And there's other things that people notice that they see from in their own experience. But I would say most of the research is really focused around the cardiovascular system. Whereas photobiomodulation or light therapy, we're using a much narrower band of frequency of light at a higher intensity, just at a specific wavelength or a couple of wavelengths to help restore healthy cellular function. So if if you're looking for something like the muscle recovery, reducing joint pain, while there's certainly some interesting studies on that from Sauna, I would argue that there's more clinical data for light therapy for something like that. If you're looking for something to enhance your cardiovascular system, then I would lean towards a sauna, which, by the way, we do have a sauna and use that as well. So we're certainly not anti-sauna.
Yeah. I gathered that when I've reached out to you guys with inquiries about that. And another thing I think, as far as the sauna, that this is one of the answers I give people, is one of the primary uses is for detoxing. I mean, obviously just for sweating your ass off and getting toxins out of your body, which is not part of the red light experience,
Exactly.
I mean, it's warm and you get a little heated standing. Should I be 3 inches away, by the way? I stand really close to it. I'm always like, I think that's it, but I get pretty warm, but you're definitely not sweating and detoxing,
Sure. Yeah. No, you're totally fine.
3 inches about right?
If you were our kind of rule of thumb that we recommend is basically roughly 6 inches for like about a 10-minute treatment. So
okay, cool.
You're totally fine at 3. I mean, my wife and I tend to be a little bit closer than the 6 too, but it's
right.
Yeah, don't stress out that you're losing the effect if you worry too much about how far away you are.
Okay, that's cool.
And one of the analogies I'll use, because we get that question all the time, saunas versus, and both therapies are great. I mean, that's our default response. Yeah. They're just, like you said earlier, they're just different. It's kind of like talk to a bodybuilder and a marathon runner, right? They train completely different. Like the bodybuilder's not going to be like doing heavy deadlifts or squats and then going out and running a marathon at the same time. It's just completely different ways to train. And so that's sort of what's happening with light therapy and like heat-based therapy or sauna-based therapy. They have very distinct mechanisms of action that just are completely different. And so whether or not you can use them at the same time, I mean, who knows? There's no clinical evidence that supports that, that idea of using both at the same time. I would argue probably from a hypothetical standpoint, you probably should use them differently, right?
Yeah.
Because one is inducing stress, the other one is completely different, right? So intentionally inducing stress in a good way. So they're just different. And to piggyback off your other comment about like how far do I stand away from a device like ours, it really boils down to like the power density that's delivered from the device, not in the form of wattage, because some people get that mixed up. Like, what's the wattage output?
Okay.
Well, it's like like an infrared heat lamp, right? A 250 watt heat lamp. That's a lot of wattage. That's a lot of wattage consumed, but the power density is actually very, very low. So they're not really ideal for the purposes of light therapy.
Right.
But yeah, so like with any light therapy device, the farther you are away from it, the less sort of dose of energy you're getting. And some people we'll get this all the time, like emails, like what's my exact dosage from the device? I'm using a DIY irradiance meter that I bought for $200 off Amazon, and my power density shows this, where it's like, well, what tissue type are you treating? How far away are you from it? Like, just because you held the little $200 meter in front of the device doesn't necessarily. That's not a good way to measure. That's not how That's not how devices are built. You don't submit your device to FDA and they say, well, did you use the Amazon meter? You know what I mean? So it's just kind of funny. So like, there's a lot of things that go into it, but generally speaking, because of the power density of our devices, like 3 to 6 inches away is a good distance, and 5 to 10 minutes is a good amount of time.
Well, when I first got the Joov, I already had my clear light sauna, and my initial idea, just because I always like to stack modalities, just in the essence of time conservation, really, was to put the Joov inside the sauna. And I believe I reached out to you guys, and you're like, yeah, you could go for it. But then a couple of reasons I didn't. I don't want to fry it and like burn out the Joov in that heat, which sounded possible. The other thing was I didn't feel like I could get close enough. If I stood the Joov up like in front of me, I'm going to be a good 15, 18 inches away from it. And I was like, nope, not close enough. I want to maximize. So that's why I'm like, have my face pressed up against it and other parts of my body that protrude from my midsection as well. That's why I always tell my friends, like, you can stand in front of my Joov, but I wouldn't touch it because I probably have. Yeah. But that's why I didn't elect to try and stack them. It just didn't seem compatible just in terms of the physics of it. But what I like to do is take a sauna and then, no, I'm sorry, the other way around. I like to do my Joov and get kind of warmed up from the red light, then take a sauna. So it's a good precursor to the sauna. Does that make sense in terms of the order of them, or does it matter?
I think so. I mean, it's interesting because it kind of boils down to, could you run and eat a salad at the same time? Well, probably could do it, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. So I think the important thing is you're basically giving energy to your cells, whether you do it before or after. It's actually quite interesting because you mentioned heliotherapy and sunlight, and unfortunately what most people do with sun is they'll basically be indoors all the time, and then come Saturday afternoon at 1 o'clock when it's like peak UV, then they're out there totally uncovered, getting all this UV wavelengths that is certainly beneficial, and your body can harness it in the right conditions, but your body hasn't been prepped in the morning receiving the red wavelengths, or in the evening helping to repair with the red wavelengths. So both of which have been shown to have those effects. So similar with the sauna, I think either doing it before or after is a great idea.
Dude, that's a really good point. At the talk I did last night at Next Health, I was just, singing the praises of sun exposure on your body and telling people, like, anyone, I believe, can safely get sun exposure by incrementally, working your way up. But I didn't think about that's true. Most people that get sunburned, say, I'm picturing someone on vacation, someone from the Midwest goes to the Bahamas and doesn't put their sunscreen on and they get totally fried, right? That's because they haven't been working their way up and acclimating to the sunlight. So I'm sensing we could use red light therapy even, not only so I use it to prep for the sauna, but it makes sense to me that you could use the red light therapy to prep your sun exposure. Do a session of red light even before you go out into the sun as a preliminary adaptation. Does that make sense?
It does, and there's some interesting studies demonstrating that as well as doing red and near infrared afterwards. So if as any of us have probably happened at some point or another in Southern California, I mean, as much sunlight as we try to get, occasionally get a little bit of a sunburn, and actually it's the photobiomodulation or light therapy is quite effective at helping to restore the skin tissues after they've been stressed.
Oh,
from
no
UV
kidding.
light.
Oh, that makes sense, because we're going to get into skin health and wound recovery and things like that. So essentially you're stressing your skin, your largest organ, if you go out in the sun unprepared and you get burned because your skin's not acclimated to that. So in a sense, you've been burned. Just like if I burn my hand on the stove, I could use red light therapy or red laser therapy to speed heal that skin because of the collagen production, right?
Exactly.
Oh, cool. So I think red light therapy then would be very useful for someone like myself who's a sun worshiper, and especially someone who's fair skinned. I mean, you're almost like Ginger here.
Yeah.
You're pretty.
Not almost.
Both of you guys
Not
are pretty fair.
Not almost. I'm full on.
You're
ginger.
full on ginger. I mean,
so when you guys were talking about skin burns, I had no idea what you were talking about. never experienced.
Well, it's funny. I didn't even think about that. I just kind of noticed that you're a bit of a redhead because you're pretty tan.
Yeah, well, it's I mean, I like the sun too,
Yeah.
I mean, so yeah, I try to get my fair share of exposure, but yeah, I mean, there's times when because when you think about when people get burned, it's like, well, they went to the beach when the sun is like emitting the most UV light, you know what I mean? And so,
Right.
Of course, if you spend too much time and you haven't been out in the sun at all, and haven't been acclimated, as you mentioned before, Luke, well, yeah, I mean, you're gonna burn tissue. Your skin is responding to that stress, right? And so the burn is a symptom of that. So, but red and near infrared light is great. Is a great healer of any damaged tissue, especially burns.
So when we get out in the sun and we get that great UVA and UVB combo and all of these other spectrums of light, it helps our body to produce vitamin D, and specifically vitamin D sulfate, the water-soluble version of vitamin D, which your body can really use, versus a supplemental vitamin D that comes from oil from sheepskin called lanolin. There's a few different sources of it. is there any data to support that red light therapy helps with vitamin D at all? Because I know there are applications for increasing hormone production, which I want to get into. But before that, vitamin D technically is a hormone, not even a vitamin. Is there any correlation there like there is with sunlight?
Not in the same way that certainly that you would get vitamin D from the UVA and UVB spectrums, as you mentioned. It would be very interesting to see a study conducted just from the systematic changes going on in the body. You mentioned the lymphatic system, all these processes, your hormone production, all these things that we know are affected by red and near infrared light. Does that have some downstream effect to your body's ability to harness UV wavelengths to produce vitamin D? I suspect it probably does.
Right, but we couldn't use red light therapy solely as an intervention to up our vitamin D production.
Exactly.
That we know of.
Correct.
Because you can use tanning beds to boost your vitamin D production if you live somewhere where there's no sun.
Yep.
Okay, and let's now talk about the benefits to hormone production, because this is one of the anecdotal benefits that I've received that was just mind-blowing. I got my testosterone tested, I think in, some years ago, I think 2010, then maybe 2012 again, and I was in the low 400s, not doing so great. I mean, I know some guys that are worse, but at that point I would have been in my late 30s, or early 40s rather. So I would say American standard, average, but not optimal, not where I want to be. I want to be superhuman, X-Men level, like biohacker. At the time, and I didn't know how to raise it. I was just, what do you do? I mean, you work out, I guess. You hang around more dudes. Like, there's ways you can meditate more, be more stoic. I mean, there's ways you can sort of hack your testosterone. And then I didn't test for a number of years. Unfortunately, I didn't do a pre-test before I started using red light therapy. But after a few months, I got my hormones tested again because I just got into my Parsley Health functional medicine. I got, my testosterone was like 870. I was, what the hell? And I think I emailed you, Scott, and I was like, does this have anything to do with this damn light you guys sold me that I'm standing in front of? And you're like, yeah, hello, there's clinical studies. We told you that. That's why we advertise it as one of the benefits. It's legit. I was like, holy shit. And then I did another test a few months later, and I was in the 600s. And that was confusing to my doctor because they're like, I don't know how it could have fluctuated that much. Whatever. But then weirdly enough, I just tested again recently and I was down to like 575 or something. So I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if hormones just fluctuate that much from month to month in general anyway, and it depends what day you tested. But they're definitely higher than they've ever been, even though I'm much older than when I tested there, back in the early, 2010 and 11. So what's the deal with the testosterone production? Because so many guys I know have low T, and so many women have low T and don't realize that women also need healthy testosterone levels. It's not just a male hormone.
Yeah, no, I think there's a couple of things going on there. You referred to some of the science that Scott had talked to you about originally about the testosterone production, but I think at a fundamental level, we're affecting your entire body's hormone production. So you have your thyroid glands are being exposed to the light. You're taking light in through your eyes, going directly to the hypothalamus, which basically controls virtually all of your body systems. So there's, I think, some systematic things that are affecting your body's ability to regulate your hormone production overall. And then there's also some interesting things that have been shown for doing the therapy directly actually on the testes and some of the resulting effects that can have.
Yeah, and you're not alone. I mean, we get anecdotally, we have a lot of people that comment about like their before and after testosterone results, both total testosterone as well as free testosterone. One guy in particular, a practitioner in Scottsdale, Arizona, Dr. John Toma, great guy, like the epitome of health. Like the guy's like 6'3", jacked, does everything right. Like doesn't use any light at all at night, turns off his whole power, everything's hardwired. Like the guy does everything. But he was explaining to us like a month ago that he had like the only thing that like historically he's always suffered from was low testosterone. right? He grew up in the Midwest, now lives in the Southwest, but now he's specifically does more outside, so he gets more natural sun exposure, and then uses red and near infrared light, our devices on a daily basis, sometimes multiple times per day. And he saw the same type of results. He went from like the low 300s. 3 months later, it was up in his total testosterone was like, I think it was in the high 700s, and then 3 months later, so 6 months total from start to finish, it was like in the 1200s, I believe, something like that. And he's seen some fluctuation. Like it's not always that high, but it's clear that you're getting whether it's targeted with your Leydig cells and your testes, or as Justin mentioned, like that systemic benefit. It's hard to truly determine.
Right.
That's never really been studied to a great extent like other areas have been, with respect to like muscle recovery and joint pain and whatnot. But yeah, there's clearly some hormonal benefits to exposing your entire body to these wavelengths of light.
Well, I remember hearing years ago about the fact, and this is not a theory, but a fact that comes from someone scientific, that by getting your testes, as you referred to them, it's just such a funny word.
You don't use that a lot? No?
By getting your nards out into the red light therapy, but into the sun, like nude sunbathing for men increases your testosterone. And I heard that and I was like, amazing. So I started doing that. So I was doing that for a number of years too, especially when I lived in a house that had, a private area in which to do that. But it's probably, now that I'm thinking about it, it's probably because of those spectrum of light that are inherent to the sun, right? It's not the UV probably doing that, but it's these red spectrums that we're now seeing have these cascades of hormonal production. So, wow, that's cool stuff. And I was going to ask too about the nudity and the close proximity of said testes to the red light. It's just interesting because when you're standing in front of a red light device, the bulbs, the LED bulbs that are the near infrared are dark, and because it's not within the visible spectrum, so it looks like they're not on. You're like, what's wrong with this thing? Tapping it, like turn on those things. But I'll find myself sometimes standing in front of it, and the little dots of the diodes for the LED or the bulbs are about the size of a quarter, so they're relative to the testes. And I find myself, I mean, depending on how God created you. But I'll be standing in front of it, and if it's one of the ones that is the near infrared that looks out, I'll be positioning myself so that one of the lit up red ones is hitting me in the right spot, if you know what I'm saying. Not to create a gross visual for listeners, but it probably doesn't matter, I'm sure. Now eventually I think I just stand there. As long as I'm fairly close to this thing and it's turned on and I'm naked, I'm getting benefits. But it's so weird to me that that part of your body, your sexual organs, have photoreceptors on them, and when light hits them, it goes through your skin and tells that part of your body to start producing different compounds. It's just fascinating.
Yeah, there's no doubt. Interesting science for sure.
It's the weirdest thing ever.
Yeah.
Like, why did God create us like that? And then beyond that, just the way my brain works, and I've talked about this with sun exposure too, and I'm such a proponent of that, done safely, of course. I have this pet theory that when you go on vacation, this is why so much sex happens, because you're going somewhere tropical, you're near bodies of water, you're grounded, you're electrically grounded, and everyone's in the sun. I think sun makes you horny because it's having that effect on your hormones. Anyway, that's my theory. I get really excited when I talk about that, as you can see. So that's what's up. What about the effect on joint health? As someone who's suffered a lot from back pain over the course of my adult life, why would red light therapy help your joints?
Yeah, I mean, it boils down to the same cellular processes that we were talking about earlier. In fact, our new devices are actually FDA cleared to reduce joint pain.
Really? So you can claim that?
We can.
Damn, good for you.
Yeah, that's you probably have some appreciation. That's no small feat to.
Oh my God, yeah. Well, I interview people all the time that come up with these cool things, and before we start recording, they're like, "Yeah, by the way, I can't talk about anything that my thing does," and I'm like, "What are we gonna talk about, dude? Like, talk about basketball? Like, well, I'm at a loss here. We have to be able to talk. I've learned how to dance around it. I understand the FDA games now. the censorship of our language in that regard. And there's a reason for it too. Anyone can come up with some snake oil and produce something that's potentially harmful to people, or just swindle them out of their hard-earned cash. So I appreciate that, but it is difficult to help explain the benefits of something when you can't say that. So congratulations on breaking that firewall of FDA approval for joint pain. So how does it work exactly?
Yeah, basically the same sort of mechanism of action that Scott was referencing earlier. So it boils down to your cells, and if your cells are healthy, they're able to produce ATP. They're able to perform their natural functions, whether it's the ligaments, the joints, the tissues that surround the joints. All those things, all those different types of tissue are affected, especially by the near-infrared wavelength that is effective at reaching those deeper tissues.
Cool.
Yeah, and you get these like primary benefits, like the production of ATP, but there's also these secondary factors too, like these wavelengths of light have been shown to enhance gene transcription. Your cells produce more cytokines, so your immune system and functions better, it becomes more phagocytic. And so, like, there's all these secondary markers too with these wavelengths of light, but it all kind of boils down to that primary benefit. Your mitochondria are producing more cellular energy, more ATP.
Interesting. So it's more the benefit there in terms of joint pain, and I'm assuming this would be muscle recovery too. Is I'm picturing like, cool, if the light's pointed on my elbow, it's healing my elbow, but it's more systemic in a sense than like the light going in and fixing that particular part of that specific joint.
Yeah. Well, I mean, targeted therapy, like if you're just targeting a sore elbow, like golfer's elbow or tennis elbow, that will work.
So both.
Yeah, so both. But
okay.
like, I would argue that you're probably it's probably better if you're getting full body exposure too, just because you do get that systemic effect. Even if you think about just using red light on your skin's the largest the largest organ of our body. And it's, you have a bunch of your microcirculatory system, runs throughout all of your skin, and those wavelengths irradiate your blood. So you're getting that systemic benefit through your entire vascular system.
Right. Because essentially, like if I'm using my cold laser, or I'm using, more targeted red light therapy on a part of my body, let's just say tennis elbow, then really what we're doing is we're bringing more energy into that area locally, right? But if you have more systemic and energy available, you have just electrons firing throughout the system of your body, then not only are you bringing those to a specific localized area, but there's just more raw energy to deal with to bring in there.
Yep, exactly.
Wow. Cool, man.
That's one of the cool
Far
things
out.
to go back to LED therapy is that you can now treat like larger areas, with high powered, LEDs now, whereas, the historical limitation with lasers, amongst other things, was that they, you can get really specific with wavelengths, and you can deliver a lot of energy, but it's very localized.
Yeah, yeah.
And you used to,
we have one little light.
Yeah, exactly.
I use this thing called a Vi-Light. It's a little clip that sticks they have laser ones and then they have LED ones. I think the one I have is LED. It's, I think, 610 nanometers. And you stick it up your nose, and it's a 20-minute treatment time, and it goes through your nasal cavity because, of course, there's a hole in your skull where your nose is. If you take that flesh off, there's 2 freaking holes right there that go right through your skull into your brain cavity, and it shines this 610 nanometer light onto your brain. And there's cognitive benefits and things to that. But again, that's just one local piece. Do you anticipate that if I'm putting my whole face and head in front of a red light device with a bunch of lights, that it's penetrating the skull and having the same effect?
Yeah, definitely. In fact, Dr. Michael Hamblin, that's actually his favorite treatment to use with the therapy, is actually treating his brain through his forehead, to be specific. So for basically a couple different reasons. One, because you have the easy access, so you don't have hair that's absorbing some of the energy. But also you have the frontal lobe and all these different processes that are in this area of the brain that's interesting as well. So yeah, you can definitely, there's multiple approaches to treat those tissues, but yeah, with a full panel, you're basically using a much higher intensity of light and able to actually penetrate through tissue, including bone.
Cool, including your skull. That's a thing I don't think a lot of people realize. It's so hard for me when people have their cell phone up to their head. I'm always like, God, it's so hard for me not to be like codependent, or whatever. Like, do you know that's bad for you? It's none of your business, Luke. Shut up. They didn't ask for your advice. But anytime I see someone doing that, I'm like, you have no idea how thin your skull is. We think, oh, I could put something up against radiation against my head. It's made of bone and my brain's protected. Dude, your brain is not protected from things like radiation or, thankfully, red light. So it can get through the forehead. What I do oftentimes is I kind of like do little head maneuvers where I'm blasting the top of my head and just kind of all over too. But I didn't think about the fact the hair is absorbing some of that sort of that energy on the way in too.
Yeah, it definitely would some of it. Although it's interesting, I can't remember the study, but there's actually been some indications that the top of the skull actually has an access point for that where it basically photoreceptors specifically that affect your hormone production, all these other things that are directly related to your hypothalamus. So that's
wow.
It's a very intuitive treatment that you're doing there.
That's cool. Well, I think for me it was just that's the top chakra, So I was like, man, I'm gonna put red light in my chakras. Kundalini awakening, dude. So, but a lot of my wacky woo-woo stuff, though, later on I find out, I'll talk to a scientist like, no, that makes perfect sense.
Right.
Like when I interviewed Jack Cruz, and I was like, all right, I do this weird thing. I go up to the mountains and I get my own spring water out of a rock, and that's the only water I drink. He was like, that's the most scientifically viable thing you could ever do if you want to drink water. I was like, yes, screw you
knew it all along.
logical skeptic people. A nerd just proved it. So what about hair loss? I've seen these devices where it's this helmet that you put on full of LED bulbs. And I'm thinking, A, it's probably horrendous amount of EMF right on your brain. Not into that. B, I think I can do that by just leaning over into my Joov device and rotating my head around a few times as I'm sitting there for 10 minutes. Is there any efficacy to the idea of reversing or preventing hair loss?
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of clinical evidence. In fact, a lot of the studies that have been published on hair regrowth are actually really well structured, really well done studies. And so there's absolutely evidence that red wavelengths, actually in particular, have been shown to enhance hair growth. For sure. And yeah, you mentioned it. There's a couple different helmet kind of type devices that are on the market. I've never personally used one or tested one for EMFs, or I'm not entirely sure what type of power is delivered through those. But yeah, with our devices, you could do sort of accomplish the same thing just by simply tilting your head down in front of it. In fact, some people will use our smaller devices on like a tabletop, especially now that we have like a little tabletop stand with it, and they'll set it on like their end table of their bed, and then they'll just kind of lay down on their bed. And put the top of their head at the top of their scalp in front of the device.
I just had an idea like duct taping one to the headboard, just sleeping with it, just blasting on my head, so I never go bald. My hair is a little bit thin on top, and I'm like, I could handle anything, but man, I don't know if my ego could handle just losing all the hair. I'm still kind of attached to that one.
Keep Jooving.
Yeah, I hope so, dude. I hope so. Yeah. And then what about, I guess this kind of goes into the same thing with the joint, health and joint recovery, but what about just actual injuries and cuts and wounds and things like that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things going on there. You've discussed the topic of easy water, for example, and I think the things that are really, really interesting that are yet to be really brought to the mainstream is the relationship that our bodies have with light and water, and these processes work, are tied together very connectedly. So if you have, there's even some pretty powerful studies showing that if you irradiate blood tissue with light, you'll actually increase the cardiovascular function, the blood flow in that area. And a lot of the same studies are explained in more detail with the study of easy water. So for those of you that haven't read it, Dr. Gerald Pollack's book, on the topic is pretty fascinating.
Fourth phase of water.
Yep,
Yeah.
the fourth phase of water. Thank you. So, in that book, they show studies and scientific tests where they have a naphthalene tube and they have water, and all of a sudden you're shining light on it, and it causes the water to go through the tube. So it's basically
Whoa, really?
hydrophilic surface. And
That's sick.
Some of the things he discusses in that book is really cool because science really hasn't been able to explain the way that our bodies move blood. And the traditional thinking many years ago, and maybe even somewhat more recently, was that it was the pressure from the heart that's pumping this blood, through these tissues.
That's what I always thought.
But what they found is that in many cases, the capillaries are actually smaller diameter than the blood cells that are flowing through them, and it cannot be. They've done pressure tests during across different areas of these of the blood flow, and they're basically showing that there's not a pressure drop there. So it's something other than pressure that's causing the blood to do this. And
wow.
There's very strong evidence from folks like Dr. Gerald Pollack that show that light, not only from outside our body, but also the infrared light that our bodies actually generate, that are actually driving these processes.
Whoa. I just had a biblical epiphany. Let there be light.
But just to add to that, I mean, by the time this goes live, you'll have probably published or pushed your interview with the folks from Signature Health.
I will. I wanted to get to that, the deuterium stuff. Yeah,
yeah,
this will be coming on the heels of that episode. Yeah,
and one of their theories is that these wavelengths of light actually change the viscosity of water in your cells and actually help your nanomotors spin faster. Right.
Oh man.
Through the electron transport chain, and so so that hasn't really been studied extensively, but those guys are leading the way when it comes to deuterium research, and that's their theory as to why these wavelengths of light are so key to deuterium depletion, which is really it's fascinating stuff.
That is, I remember talking to Jack Cruz about the whole exclusion zone or easy water, the fourth phase of water thing, and how it relates to light and how it relates to infrared saunas. And he explained to me, he said, yeah, dude, your body is making exclusion zone water when it's exposed to that light. Very interesting. Mm-hmm. And then interviewing, and what we're referring to, guys, is I don't have the episode number in front of me because at the time of this recording, it's not out yet, but there will be an episode all about deuterium that will have been published in the last few weeks. So please go back and listen to that. It's a 3.5 hour, it's the longest, deepest dive I've ever done because I think it's one of the most important health and medical discoveries of our time, literally. And it's all related to the water in our body, and that our body actually produces water, right? It produces this metabolic or deuterium depleted water, and I guess the light, as you're saying, is part of that process. Mm-hmm. Which,
exactly.
Because part of the deuterium depletion program is red light therapy, mm-hmm. and also sun exposure, mm-hmm. and cold thermogenesis and all these other things that, again, would be inherent to our natural life. But since we've become so far removed from our natural environment and we're living indoors, we don't get light, we have EMFs, we never get cold, we're always at 68 degrees, we never get that hot like we do in a sauna. We have to sort of, I guess, implement some of these interventions that, again, to me, it's always mimicking nature and amplifying nature because we're so far removed. Mm-hmm. But that's a fascinating factoid that the easy water and then the deuterium depleted water, I wonder if those are the same thing in your body. I have to look into that. I have a feeling they're not, but it's just weird that your body actually manufactures water out of fat. That's where it comes from, and that the light helps do that.
Sure. Yeah.
Trippy shit. What about, and I think I've just got a couple more questions here and we'll wrap it up. What about the effect on mood, neurotransmitters? So we covered hormones, but I feel very elevated when I'm out in the sun. I feel very elevated when I do red light therapy, when I do infrared sauna, where again, I'm being exposed to these invisible frequencies of light. And in my clear light sauna, they have something they call chromotherapy, which is this little LED panel that you can change the colors. I just keep mine on red all the time because that's the only spectrum. I don't ever want blue light or whatever. But how does light affect our mood?
No, I think that's a great thing that most people are familiar with that in some sense. I mean, I referenced the fact of when going back to the Midwest in the middle of winter after having been out here in Southern California. It's just like it's like a gut punch. We had literally 3 straight weeks we didn't see sun. It was just like gloomy, and it's no wonder that you have a very real condition or with basically being deprived of light. So it's not a shock that it plays an incredible role, and it's interesting because everybody is a little bit different. So you mentioned that if you do light therapy right before bed, it kind of like heightens your senses and maybe just kind of amps you up a little bit, so to speak. For some people, myself included, I mean, it does the total opposite. It just like de-stresses me, knocks me out, and like puts me to sleep. So it's interesting how different people's bodies respond. So kind of going back to that a little bit, it's just it's great to basically adjust the therapy to what fits you in what you find works best for you. But yeah, it's definitely something that is a common thing that many people don't think about when they first try the therapy, but is a very real benefit.
And it's sort of hard to measure that out in a clinical study, right? Mood, because it's very qualitative.
Talk about placebo.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you in a good mood? Yeah, I'm in a good mood. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. On a scale.
Test over. Yeah.
Are you in a good mood?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Define good.
Right. Yeah, but it's sort of hard to quantify in a clinical study, but it's definitely one of the most sort of consistent. Some of the most consistent feedback we get with our devices in particular is like, someone purchases a device for joint pain, right? But one of the byproducts of using the therapy on a consistent basis is just better mood, better cognitive function. They feel better, and that's, again, that kind of may sound a little bit woo-woo, but that's just one of the nice sort of like secondary benefits to, to exposing all of your body to, these wavelengths of light is just an elevated sense of, mental state.
I wonder if there are any studies about red light and seasonal affective disorder.
There definitely are. Yeah.
There are?
Yeah,
because, they use blue light devices in Scandinavian stuff, these little blue panels you stare at to pretend like you're in the sun, and it increases your serotonin production and things like that, right? Because when you're cut off and these countries typically have high levels of alcoholism and suicide and things like that because people aren't getting light. Mm-hmm. So is there any of that for red light?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's arguably more clinical evidence for bright light for SAD or for seasonal affective disorder, but there's definitely a handful of published studies that suggest or that demonstrate, I should say, that red and near infrared light can help reduce those symptoms, of seasonal affective disorder.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense because, again, going back to the beginning of the conversation, that's, what we're talking about essentially is just taking some of the sun. We're just stealing sun and plugging it in a wall, basically. So if those bright or those white or blue light devices are effective for that, it would make sense if you took one of the other spectrums, such as red light, and amplified that, you're going to be super happy too.
Yeah.
Cool. Last thing I wanted to ask about was the flicker rate of LED lighting. When we're in this modern world now, because of conservation of energy, we've developed fluorescent lights, we've developed LED lights, and this is cool lighting, not just in its, the color temperature, but in the actual temperature to touch because it uses less energy, right? So if you have an old incandescent bulb, a lot of wattage necessary, a lot of expenditure of your utility power to create that light. LEDs, not so much, but the downside is they flicker, and maybe that's one of the reasons they produce less energy. So to the naked eye, we can't see these fluorescent lights that are lighting us for the video, or your typical LED lights that are in your refrigerator, your bathroom, your kitchen, your bedroom, wherever. Every big box store is full of them. We can't see with the naked eye, but in fact they're turning on and off a zillion times a second or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And I've heard that with LED lighting, just inherent to their construction, it's impossible to not have them flicker. So with red light therapy, since it is LED light, if our eyes are open during the therapy, is our brain getting scrambled from the flicker effect?
Great question. So backing up a step, I would argue that actually just about anything that you plug into an alternating current power supply is actually going to have some modulation of the energy.
So even an incandescent bulb, just because it's hooked up to the wall and that is an AC current, an alternating current inherent to its structure or its nature, is going to buzz to a certain degree.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now with an incandescent bulb, because of the filament, and it's basically lit up and it's the actual temperature of the filament that's causing the light. Obviously, it's not totally cooling down as much as like an LED chip would, but even an LED chip, it's not like a true on-off cycle. We're talking about a wave. So the studies that we've referenced today, they're using continuous wave therapy, light therapy. So they're not actually intentionally doing a pulsed, true on-off pulsed light. It's there's a wave of the light energy as it's hitting the photons are hitting your tissue. So in that setting, the clinical research has demonstrated that there is not any negative effects from brain scrambling or anything along those lines.
I just feel like when I walk in Target, which is rare because thank God Amazon, but when I walk in Target, the minute I walk in a place that has LED lighting, I can't even say my name anymore. I just become immediately brain dead. And I'm like, it has to be the lighting. It's not like the paint or something in here.
Yeah.
It's the lighting. There's just this weird effect that artificial lighting has on my brain specifically.
Yeah.
And most of the time, it's probably the wavelengths that are emitted from those LEDs, not necessarily the fact that they may be pulsing at certain frequencies.
So less so the flicker and more so because it's that really heinous narrow spectrum of blue light.
Exactly. Yeah, you're right. And because the reality is, like, when you look at published literature, the gold standard is continuous wave light therapy, as Justin mentioned, but there's actually like a growing body of evidence for pulsing light therapy, intentionally pulsing. So intentionally, making your output flicker, right, to generate a more profound health effect or health benefit.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because the red light bed that they have at Next Health, I mentioned it earlier. I don't know who designs it, but it's this is like if you have a clinic, you get one of these if you're well heeled, I guess. But it was interesting because the different settings on it were the rate of flicker or pulsing, essentially. That's what you would set depending on what the desired outcome was, rather than changing the wavelength of light based on the nanometers that you want from 600 to 800 or whatever. I thought that was weird. I was like, huh? So it seems like people in light therapy are getting hip to also this pulsing, and you can use it to your advantage then?
Yeah, you can definitely use it to your advantage. I mean, like I said before, the gold standard across the board is still continuous wave therapy.
Right.
There's no doubt. But yeah, I mean, with pulsing, you can in essence deliver a more significant power density, faster, because you're pulsing the energy. It's on off. So
interesting.
To kind of circle back around to this flicker effect, I think most people get that confused with the wavelength versus it's really more the wavelengths that may be deteriorate, or it may cause like sort of downstream negative ramifications versus the actual frequency or flicker.
There certainly is effects that you can see from frequency, specifically with fluorescent tube lighting. A lot of times you can actually like visibly or just about visibly sense the flicker of that gas that's being charged and stopped and then charged and stopped.
Right.
So there's definitely some effects there, but yeah, I would suspect the bigger issue at play would be the wavelengths in a lot of those cases, and really just boils down to economics. So it's much cheaper to both make and power a bulb that's 5,000 Kelvin or 5,500 degrees Kelvin, which very heavily weighted to the blue spectrum, just because the way the human eye sees light. So the same power density of blue light as red light, your eye is going to recognize that blue light as about 10 times as powerful as the red. So
that's a trip.
It's very interesting. In fact, this gets into a little bit of just the science of how do you measure light, but actually lumens are actually a measure. It's actually a weighted scale based on how the human eye recognizes light. So if you go to Home Depot or anywhere else like that to purchase a light bulb, you'll see you can get so many lumens from this
Sure.
bulb. That scale is based on how your eyes actually recognize the light, which is heavily sensitive to blue light. So it's kind of interesting because it's really based on the fact that it's cheaper to power light bulbs, and they're theoretically more efficient per lumen if they're heavily weighted towards the blue end of the spectrum.
Wow. And that's why when you go into Home Depot, like there'll be that big row of lighting and I'm just like toxic. I'm like, I can't find one freaking light bulb. That's because they're all, manufactured and marketed toward conservation of energy, which is a great idea. We all want to save the world. I don't throw my freaking gum wrappers on the sidewalk, but God damn it, at the expense of our health, it's either going to be me or the earth. I'll be live healthy and I'll be out of here. The earth will still be here suffering from my burning of coil to make a yellow light bulb or whatever. But it's trippy when you think about that. So what's the difference between kelvins and lumens?
So kelvins are a measure of the temperature of the light. So it's basically a way of scale of measuring how much blue light you have in it. So if you go to look at a bulb that's, say, 5,000 degrees Kelvin or 6,000 degrees Kelvin, it's going to be extremely blue weighted or blue heavy wavelengths.
I.e. you're getting cancer.
Yeah.
Okay, carry on.
And fortunately, it's become easier to get light bulbs that are actually more on the warm spectrum, almost borderline candlelight. So where you're 20 or 2,000 degrees Kelvin, 2,700 degrees Kelvin, where it has a very similar look to like candlelight.
Right. Which you just described. It's daytime in here now, and I have these blue fluorescent stage lights on, but at night I wonder what the kelvins are, but it's all amber lighting in here, so I don't have to wear my freaking blue blockers around my own house. So that's interesting, because then you get into the blue light toxicity and the junk lighting. So the most junk lighting would be the most blue, so the higher Kelvin would be the worst for us biologically, because it's the most unnatural, narrow spectrum of light that would never exist in nature.
Exactly.
Whereas we get down to 2,000 Kelvin, that actually is more like natural daylight in a sense.
Especially in the morning and in the
evenings.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Yeah.
You get and I forget the exact number, but you definitely get blue light during the especially during like some of the midday sun, where you get it's a bright intense light.
Yeah.
But where you really cause yourself trouble is exposing your eyes to that, especially after dark, where now historically speaking, your eyes would have only seen candlelight or fire after sunset.
Yeah. This again, for me, it always goes back to nature, and it's just the common sense of it. Duh. We don't want light that our brain thinks is noon when it's midnight. Like, that just can't be good. I don't even need to know the science. I just know that just sounds dumb. A great takeaway here, though, is when one goes to shop for lighting and you're like, I don't know, you go on Amazon or Home Depot or whatever, that you want to look for your evening lighting setup, the lower Kelvin would be the most biologically appropriate. So if a 2,000 is like a slightly warm white light, then what would a red light, like a red incandescent party bulb, be in terms of kelvins?
That's a good question. Actually, 2,000 will look pretty amber. That'll look pretty yellow, even orangish. Even 2,700, it's going to feel pretty warm, pretty soft light. So same settings as I think I forget the name of the one app. There's one called Iris. There's one for your laptops where you can dial it down.
Sure. I use Iris. I think that's the best one because you can get really hardcore and kill all the blue. What's that other one? We have Night Shift on the iPhone. There's Iris Flux.
That's the one I was thinking about.
But then you find out Flux doesn't cut. You can't cut out the green spectrum.
Yeah.
So I wonder what, in terms of Kelvin. In terms of kelvins in the light temperature, at what point is melatonin suppressed?
Ooh, that's an interesting question.
Yeah, and it's definitely going to be like down and probably even below the amber spectrum and into the red spectrum, really. Because when they have those programs like Flux, or even some of those blue blocking glasses that are more yellow, what I found out is that even the green spectrum of light, which is just below, I guess in kelvins would be below the blue, that suppresses melatonin. Not as much as blue light, but maybe half as much. So yeah, if you want to really beat the melatonin,
Yeah.
the ill effects of melatonin killing, you have to stop the blue light and the green light. God damn, why can't we just live, man? What a pain in the ass being a human is. It's all this biohacking. Sometimes we're just like, really, do I have to do all this just to be a regular guy? But I don't want to be a regular guy. I want to be optimal.
Yeah.
But it's because we're trying to live in the modern world with these conveniences. I mean, God bless the light switch. You walk in your house, it's dark as hell out, turn the light switch on. You know, you hear the gospel singers groove, and it's this magic moment that we take for granted, but it comes with a cost. So, yeah, well, I think we covered everything, guys, that I wanted to talk about, man. As I said, I was like, it'll be an hour, famous last word. So we covered above and beyond the call of duty here. I want to thank you guys for your time. As we wrap it up, I've learned a lot from you two knuckleheads today. Who have been 3 teachers or teachings that have influenced your work that you might suggest our listeners go check out as well?
Well, I've mentioned a few already, but Dr. Gerald Pollack, I think, was one that your audience would find fascinating. Overall, just the importance of water and the role that it plays in health, and then he touches on some of the impacts that light have on that. So. I'd have to go with his work and Dr. Hamblin. If you're into reading the medical clinical data on the science of photobiomodulation, there's really no one else that's comes to mind as being at the forefront of
so
that
he's
field.
the Mac Daddy of that field. Okay, cool. That's good to know.
The Mac Daddy.
You got a third?
A
third. Gosh, you're gonna stump me now.
When I stump people, they're usually like, my granddad. I'm like, that's cool, but we can't Google your granddad typically and go learn from them. But it's up to you. Some people, it's Jesus or Buddha or something too. The Q was Martin Luther King and Malcolm X were 2 of his. I was like, dope. Haven't heard them. Maybe Gandhi was one. So it's whatever.
If you can't think,
go ahead. We'll go back to him.
I'll name some. If you're into like this sort of stuff, I do think to plug the Signature Health guys. They're doing some really cool stuff when it comes to deuterium depletion research. So I mean, if you're into like the next kind of cool thing, I think they're doing some really interesting work. I'm kind of like most of the stuff that I read is like nonfiction. So. I'm a big fan of like Andrew Warner and his work with like Mixergy. He's kind of like a startup business guy. So like that's cool. Rand Fishkin, founder of Moz, M-O-Z, Moz.com. I think his work over the course of like time in the startup world is pretty cool. So those would probably maybe be
awesome.
Be 3 that I'd call out. Yeah.
Excellent. Did you come up with your third yet?
I'm struggling. I'm not gonna
Grandpa,
lie.
That's fine.
Grandpa Strahan.
We'll let you off easy. You gave us 2 heavy hitters. We can go out with that. And where can we find you guys? Anything you want to promote? Social media, web addresses, any of that stuff?
Yeah, our website is joov.com. That's JOOV.com. And check us out there. If you go to our Learn page, you can read up on all the science that we referred to today. Virtually every single article on there cites multiple clinical studies, so you don't have to take our word for it. You can read the science behind it as well. And then perhaps is equally interesting for a lot of people are the customer reviews, and that's probably my favorite part of being in this industry is just seeing the actual first-hand accounts from people that are trying the therapy out and the benefits that they're receiving.
I'm glad you mentioned that because listeners, one of the things that I enjoy most as a podcast host is getting reviews on iTunes and reading the reviews. Yeah, thank you for that. So please, if you're listening, I always recommend that you, or not recommend, but beg and plead on my hands and knees that you do this before and after the shows and my intros and outros. But please leave a review. It's helpful. Did he forget any things you want to point people to?
No.
That's it. Okay.
Hit them all, yeah.
Joov.com, JOOV.com. And my listeners know, I talk about this stuff all the time. Whenever I find something that I use a lot, I talk about it because it helps so many people. And tons of my listeners have already bought Joovs and are totally into it. Half my friends have them. It's a thing, which is why I'm really glad to get you guys on the show. And it's perfect timing because now you've had a huge sort of development with your next generation here. So that'll be great. Is that going to be out by the time we publish this?
Yep.
It's out now.
It already is? Okay,
it's
cool.
out, yeah.
All right, cool. I wasn't sure if this is the prototype or whatever. Those of you listening, as I said, we have this giant wall of sound, man. No, we have this wall of red light over here in the living room. We're going to shoot some videos of it right now. So I think that's it, guys. Well, thanks for joining me on the Lifestylist podcast. And you be well until we meet again.
Awesome. Thanks, Luke.